A down-on-his-luck janitor, ridiculed for his crumbling forest shack, was the town's laughingstock. But when a shocking discovery turned his life upside down, those who mocked him were left in stunned silence. This is the unbelievable true story of perseverance, hidden fortune, and the ultimate revenge of the underdog. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe, hit that like button, and turn on notifications. Stories like this remind us that life can change in an instant. You won't want to miss what happens next. The janitor nobody noticed. The cold morning air bit into Ethan Cole's lungs as he trudged through the thick underbrush, his boots crunching over frost-covered leaves. The sun hadn't yet risen over Brackenville, Oregon, a forgotten logging town where time moved slower than the rusted gears of an abandoned sawmill. At 52, Ethan was a man who had long accepted his place in the shadows. To most, he was just a high school janitor, the silent figure mopping floors while teenagers whispered behind his back. To the rest of Brackenville, he was the weird old man who lived in a rotting shack deep in the woods. His home, if it could even be called that, was a crumbling one-room structure with a sagging roof and walls patched up with scrap wood and tarps. The locals joked that a strong wind would finally finish what time had started. But to Ethan, it was shelter. It was his. Rusty, a scruffy mutt with one ear permanently flopped over, trotted beside him, panting softly. The dog was the only living thing that ever seemed happy to see him. Ethan's callous hands tightened around the straps of his backpack as he reached the edge of town. The high school loomed ahead, its brick facade worn and tired. Just like him, he slipped into the side door, the one only the custodial staff used, and got to work. The hallways were empty this early, but he could still hear the echoes of yesterday's laughter. Laughter that had been aimed at him. "Hey, Trash King, how's your palace looking?" Derek Van Camp's voice rang in his memory, followed by the snickers of his friends. Derek, the golden boy of Brackenville, son of Hank Van Camp, the man who owned half the town. The Van Camps were used to getting what they wanted, and what they wanted most was to remind people like Ethan where they stood. Ethan didn't react. He never did. He just kept mopping, kept scrubbing, kept his head down. By the time the first students trickled in, he was already invisible again, just part of the background, like the flickering fluorescent lights or the stained ceiling tiles. The school day passed in a blur of noise and motion. None of it meant for him. When the final bell rang, he waited until the last stragglers had cleared out before starting his final rounds. That's when he found it. Fresh spray paint on the lockers. Trash King rules here. His stomach twisted, but his face stayed blank. He reached for the cleaning spray and got to work. Night had fallen by the time Ethan made it back to his shack. The woods were quiet, save for the occasional rustle of animals in the brush. Rusty trotted ahead, sniffing at the ground before letting out a low whine. Ethan frowned. Something was off. Then he saw it. The door to his shack was slightly ajar. His pulse spiked. He never left it unlocked. Cautiously, he pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The inside was a wreck. His few belongings tossed around, his mattress flipped over, the small pantry raided, and on the wall, in dripping red paint, the same words from the lockers. "Trash King." Rusty growled softly, ears pinned back. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. For the first time in years, anger burned in his chest. But just as quickly it faded. What could he do? Report it? The sheriff was Hank Van Camp's drinking buddy. No one would care. With a tired sigh, he righted his mattress and started cleaning. As he bent to pick up a shattered jar, something caught his eye, a glint in the dirt near the base of the wall. He brushed the soil aside, revealing a smooth, oddly heavy rock. It was dark, almost metallic, with strange flecks that shimmered in the dim light of his lantern. Ethan turned it over in his hands. He'd seen plenty of rocks in these woods, but nothing like this. Rusty whined again, nudging his leg. Ethan pocketed the rock and went back to cleaning. But as he worked, his mind kept circling back to it. What was it? And why did it feel like it might change everything? The town's cruel joke. The morning sun did little to warm Ethan as he stepped out of his shack, the weight of the strange rock heavy in his coat pocket. Rusty trotted beside him, ears perked at every sound in the woods. The vandalism from the night before still lingered in the air, The red paint on the wall hadn't fully dried, and the words Trash King seemed to mock him with every glance. He should have been used to it by now. The laughter, the whispers, the way people in Brackenville looked right through him as if he were part of the scenery. But this was different. This wasn't just words thrown in passing. This was an invasion. Someone had been inside his home, his only sanctuary. Ethan's jaw tightened as he walked a familiar path toward town. He needed supplies, more paint remover, maybe some plywood to patch up the damage. But more than that, he needed answers. That rock in his pocket didn't belong in these woods. And if it was what he suspected, something valuable, then maybe, just maybe, it was a break he'd been waiting for. Brackenville's main street was already bustling when Ethan arrived. Pickup trucks lined the gravel parking lot outside Miller's General Store, and a group of men in flannels and work boots loitered near the entrance, sipping coffee from paper cups. Their laughter died down as Ethan approached. Well, one of them drawled, Roy Pettigrew, a mechanic who'd known Ethan since high school and never let him forget who'd peeked back then. If it ain't the Trash King himself. A few snickers followed. Ethan kept walking, eyes fixed on the store's door. "Hey, Cole," Roy called after him. "Heard you had some visitors last night. You ought to be more careful. Place like yours might attract raccoons. Or worse." Ethan stopped, his fingers curled into fists at his sides. But he didn't turn around. Rusty let out a low growl, baring his teeth at Roy. "Better keep that mutt on a leash," Roy warned, though he took a half step back. Ethan exhaled slowly, then pushed into the store without another word. Inside, the smell of fresh bread and motor oil filled the air. Mrs. Miller, the elderly owner, glanced up from behind the counter. Her expression softened when she saw him. "Ethan," she said quietly, "heard about what happened." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. She reached under the counter and slid a can of paint remover toward him. "On the house." Ethan's throat tightened. Small kindnesses were rare in Brackenville, especially when they involved crossing the van camps. He took the can with a muttered thanks and grabbed a few other supplies, nails, a hammer, a roll of duct tape. Bandages, too, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe he was just expecting more trouble. As he turned toward the counter, the bell above the door jingled. Derek Van Camp strolled in, flanked by two of his friends. Ethan's stomach dropped. Derek was everything Ethan wasn't, tall, broad-shouldered, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never wanted for anything. His father's influence clung to him like cologne. When his eyes landed on Ethan, a smirk tugged at his lips. "Well, look who's here," Derek said, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Your Highness." One of his friends snickered. Ethan kept his head down, setting his items on the counter. Mrs. Miller's lips pressed into a thin line, but she began ringing him up without comment. Derek sauntered closer, leaning against the counter like he owned it. "You know, Cole, if you're that hard up for cash, my dad's always looking for help at the scrapyard. Of course, you have to actually work for a change." Ethan's fingers twitched toward his pocket, where the strange rock sat like a secret. He could feel its weight, its promise, but he said nothing. Derek's smirk faltered when Ethan didn't rise to the bait. He straightened, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Whatever. Enjoy your shack." As Derek and his friends turned to leave, one of them, Tyler, a wiry kid with a permanent sneer, knocked over a display of canned goods with a loud crash. Mrs. Miller gasped. "Oops," Tyler said, grinning. "Guess the janitor's got some cleaning to do." The door slammed behind them, leaving silence in their wake. Ethan stared at the scattered cans, his pulse roaring in his ears. Mrs. Miller sighed. "Don't worry about it, Ethan." I got it," he said quietly. He knelt, picking up the cans one by one. Rusty whined, nudging his hand as if to say, "Let's just go." But Ethan wasn't thinking about the cans. He was thinking about the rock. And he was thinking about Dr. Lila Reyes, the geologist who'd set up a temporary lab on the edge of town. If anyone could tell him what it was, it'd be her. The sun was high by the time Ethan finished patching up his shack. The red paint was gone, the door reinforced, the worst of the damage hidden. But the humiliation? That would take longer to fade. Rusty lay on the porch, watching as Ethan pulled the rock from his pocket and turned it over in his hands. The flecks caught the light, shimmering like tiny stars. He took a deep breath. Tomorrow, he'd go see Dr. Reyes. And if this rock was what he hoped, Brackenville was about to learn that even a trash king could have treasure. The geologist's shock. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn, the rock clutched tightly in his hand like a talisman. He hadn't slept much. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more improbable than the last. Could this really be something valuable? Or was he just desperate enough to believe in fairy tales? Rusty stretched beside him, yawning loudly before nosing at Ethan's arm as if urging him to move. "All right, boy," Ethan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Let's go see what we've got." The early air was crisp as they made their way toward the edge of town, where Dr. Lila Reyes had set up her temporary field lab. The state had sent her to survey the area for potential mining sites. Something about old geological surveys suggesting untapped resources. Most folks in Brackenville had dismissed her work as a waste of time. "If there was anything valuable here, we have found it by now," Roy Pettigrew had scoffed when she first arrived. Ethan had never spoken to her before, but he'd seen her around, a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, always dressed in sturdy boots and a faded flannel shirt. She didn't seem like the type to laugh at him. At least he hoped not. The lab was a converted trailer parked near the old quarry, its windows glowing with soft yellow light despite the early hour. Ethan hesitated at the foot of the steps, suddenly unsure. What if this was nothing? What if he was just making a fool of himself again? Rusty whined, nudging his leg. Ethan took a deep breath and knocked. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing Dr. Reyes. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she held a steaming mug of coffee in one hand. She blinked at him in surprise. "Can I help you?" Ethan swallowed. I found something. Thought you might know what it is." Her gaze flicked to Rusty, then back to him. A beat passed before she stepped aside. "Come in." The trailer was cluttered but organized, maps pinned to walls, trays of rock samples neatly labeled, a microscope and other equipment Ethan couldn't name covering the small table. The air smelled like coffee and earth. Dr. Reyes set her mug down. "What V you got?" Ethan pulled the rock from his pocket and held it out. For a second, she just stared at it. Then her eyes widened. "Where did you find this?" Her voice was sharp, urgent. Ethan's pulse jumped. "Near my place, in the woods." She took the rock from him, turning it over in her hands before grabbing a magnifying glass. Her fingers trembled slightly. "This isn't just a rock," she said after a long moment. "It's rhodium, one of the rarest and most valuable metals on Earth." Ethan's breath caught. "How valuable?" Dr. Reyes looked up, her expression dead serious. "Right now, about $14,000 an ounce." The number hit Ethan like a punch. He swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the table for support. "You're saying this little rock is worth—" "No," she interrupted. "I'm saying if this came from a deposit near your property, what's still in the ground could be worth millions." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Rusty let out a quiet whine, breaking the spell. Dr. Reyes set the rock down carefully, as if afraid it might vanish. "Ethan, can I call you Ethan? We need to talk." 20 minutes later, Ethan sat numbly at the small folding table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of him. Dr. Reyes had explained everything. How rhodium was used in everything from car converters to electronics, how its value had skyrocketed in recent years, how a deposit this size could reshape the entire region. And it was on his land. "You need to file a mineral claim," she said, tapping a map spread between them. "Now, before word gets out." Ethan stared at the map, at the rough circle she'd drawn around the area near his shack. His mind spun. This changed everything. But then, a loud engine roared outside, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. Dr. Reyes frowned, moving the window. "Damn it!" Ethan didn't need to look to know who it was. The sleek black truck parked haphazardly outside could only belong to one person, Hank Van Camp. The door of the trailer flew open before Ethan could react. Hank stood there, his broad frame filling the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. Ethan, the rock on the table, the maps. A slow, calculating smile spread across his face. Well, he drawled. What do we have here? Dr. Reyes stepped forward. Mr. Van Camp, this is a private. I heard you had a visitor, Lila. Hank interrupted, still staring at Ethan. Didn't expect it to be old Trash King himself. Ethan's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay still. Hank sauntered in, picking up the rock with a chuckle. What's this? A little souvenir. Dr. Reyes' voice was ice. Put that down. Hank ignored her, turning the rock over in his hands. His smirk faltered slightly as he studied it. Then his gaze snapped to Ethan. Where'd you find this? Ethan said nothing. Hank's eyes narrowed. Cole, land ownership gets real complicated around here. Wouldn't want you getting tangled up in something you don't understand. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Dr. Reyes crossed her arms. Get out, Hank. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hank set the rock down with exaggerated care. This isn't over, he said softly, looking straight at Ethan. Then he turned and left, the trailer door slamming behind him. Silence fell again, heavier than before. Dr. Reyes let out a slow breath. We need to move fast. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing, because Hank Van Camp didn't make empty threats. And if he wanted Ethan's land, he'd try to take it. The secret claim. The moment Hank Van Camp's truck disappeared down the gravel road. Ethan turned to Dr. Reyes, his voice low and urgent. What I need to do. She was already moving, grabbing a folder from a drawer and spreading papers across the table. First, we verify the deposit. Then you file a mining claim with the Bureau of Land Management. Today, before Hank can pull strings to block you. Ethan swallowed hard. He'd never filed legal paperwork in his life. The closest he'd come was signing his janitorial contract at the high school. How long will that take? If we do it right, a few hours. She met his eyes. But Hank has friends in the county office. The second he suspects what we're doing, he'll try to stop you. A cold knot formed in Ethan's stomach. He knew exactly how Hank operated. The Van Camps didn't just win. They made sure everyone else lost. Rusty whined at his feet, sensing his tension. Dr. Reyes grabbed her keys. We'll take my truck. And Ethan? She paused. Don't tell anyone where we're going. The drive to Ethan's property was tense and quiet. Every passing car made Ethan's shoulders tense, half expecting to see Hank's black truck roaring up behind them. Dr. Reyes kept her eyes on the dirt road, her fingers tight around the steering wheel. When they reached the shack, she didn't waste time. Within minutes, she was kneeling near the spot where Ethan had found the rock, chipping away at the soil with a small pickaxe. Here, she muttered, brushing dirt from a glimmering vein in the exposed rock. She held up a handheld device. A spectrometer, she called it, and its screen flashed with numbers that made her breath catch. Ethan, this isn't just a deposit. Her voice was barely above a whisper. This is a mother lode. He crouched beside her, staring at the thin, shimmering line in the earth. It looked like nothing special, just a streak of dull metal in the dirt. But the way Dr. Reyes touched it, with something close to reverence, sent a shiver down his spine. How much? He asked. She shook her head. I can't even estimate yet. But if it runs deep... She looked up at him, her eyes blazing. This could be one of the biggest rhodium finds in decades. The weight of her words pressed down on him. This wasn't just life-changing money. This was generational wealth, the kind that could erase every hardship he'd ever faced. But first, they had to claim it. The Brackenville County Clerk's office was a squat brick building on the edge of town, the kind of place where time moved slower than the ceiling fans. Ethan kept his head down as he followed Dr. Reyes inside, his hat pulled low over his face. The last thing he needed was someone recognizing him and running to Hank. The clerk, a bored-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose, barely glanced up as they approached. Help you? Dr. Reyes slid the paperwork across the counter. Mining claim for the coal parcel. All forms completed and notarized. The clerk blinked, finally looking up. She studied Ethan for a long moment, then the papers. This the old Miller tract? out by Black Pine Ridge. Ethan nodded, his throat dry. She flipped through the pages, her frown deepening. You know Hank Van Camp's been eyeing that land for years. Dr. Reyes's voice turned sharp. Is there a problem with the filing? A tense silence stretched. Then the clerk sighed and reached for her stamp. No problem. The thud of the official seal hitting paper was the sweetest sound Ethan had ever heard. They were halfway back to Dr. Reyes's truck when Ethan heard the shout. Cole! Derek Van Camp stood at the edge of the parking lot, his face twisted in confusion. His eyes darted from Ethan to Dr. Reyes, then to the papers in her hand. Realization dawned, and with it, panic. He yanked out his phone. Dr. Reyes grabbed Ethan's arm. Go. Now. They sprinted for the truck, Derek's furious voice ringing out behind them. Dad, you need to get down here. The engine roared to life as Dr. Reyes peeled out of the lot. In the rear-view mirror, Ethan saw Derek still shouting into his phone, his free hand gesturing wildly after them. It's done, Dr. Reyes said, her knuckles white on the wheel. The claim is legal. But Ethan, she glanced at him, her face grim. Hank won't take this lying down. Ethan knew she was right. He'd just declared war on the most powerful man in Brackenville, and Hank Van Camp fought dirty. Back at the shack, Ethan paced the small space while Dr. Reyes made calls to her contacts at the State Mining Bureau. Rusty trailed after him, whining softly. It's official, she said at last, hanging up. The claim is registered. But Ethan, Hank already called them. He's contesting it. Ethan stopped pacing. On what grounds? He's claiming ancestral rights. Says his grandfather staked that land back in the 40s. She shook her head. It's bullshit, but it'll tie things up in court for months. Ethan sank onto his cot, the weight of the day crashing down on him. He'd been so close. Then Dr. Reyes knelt in front of him, her voice fierce. Listen to me. You hold the deed. Unless Hank can produce paperwork that predates yours, which he can't, that land is yours. But, she hesitated, he's going to come at you from every angle. Legal threats, intimidation, maybe worse. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the shack. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Ethan looked down at his hands, rough from years of thankless work, then at the framed deed hanging crookedly on his wall. The only thing he'd ever owned. Until today. Let him try, he said quietly. The storm broke just then, rain hammering down on the roof like a drumbeat. It sounded like a challenge. Burnt but not broken. The rain fell in sheets, turning the dirt path outside Ethan's shack into a river of mud. Inside, the roof leaked in 3 places. The steady plink-plink of water hitting buckets, the only sound besides Rusty's anxious panting. Dr. Reyes had left an hour ago, promising to return at first light with a lawyer friend who could help navigate Hank's legal threats. Ethan sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the deed hanging on the wall. The paper looked fragile under the flickering lantern light, just ink and parchment, but it was all that stood between him and losing everything before he'd even had it. A gust of wind rattled the door. Rusty's head snapped up, a low growl building in his throat. What is it, boy? Ethan murmured, standing slowly. Then he smelled it. Smoke. He yanked open the door just as the first orange glow flickered through the trees. Not lightning. Not some distant campfire. Flames. And they were getting closer. Ethan moved without thinking. He grabbed the deed from the wall, shoved it inside his coat, and whistled for Rusty. The dog bolted outside just as the first embers landed on the roof. The fire moved unnaturally fast, the wind whipping it into a frenzy. By the time Ethan stumbled clear of the tree line, his shack was fully engulfed, the heat so intense it stung his face from 50 yards away. Rusty barked wildly at the flames, then whined and pressed against Ethan's legs. Ethan couldn't breathe. Everything he owned, his clothes, his tools, the few photos he had of his parents, all gone in minutes. But the deed was safe, and that meant the land was still his. The fire trucks arrived too late. Hank Van Camp stood among the volunteer firefighters, his expression the perfect picture of concern. When their eyes met across the blaze, Hank gave him a slow, knowing smile. Terrible accident. Hank shouted over the roar of the flames. Good thing you got out safe. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He knew, they both knew, this was no accident. But without proof, what could he do? Sheriff Dawson clapped a heavy hand on Ethan's shoulder. We'll get you set up at the motel for the night. Town will cover it. Ethan shrugged him off. I'm fine. The sheriff exchanged a glance with Hank. Now, Ethan, don't be stubborn. That's what community's for. The hypocrisy burned worse than the fire. Where was this community when kids vandalized his home? When the whole town laughed behind his back? Dr. Reyes's truck skidded to a stop just then, mud spraying from the tires. She took in the scene with wide eyes before rushing to Ethan's side. My God, are you hurt? Ethan shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. They waited until you left. Her face darkened with understanding. Without another word, she steered him toward her truck. You're staying with me tonight. As they drove away, Ethan watched in the side mirror as his shack collapsed in on itself, the flames reaching hungrily for the sky. Hank thought this would break him. He was wrong. Dr. Reyes's rented cabin was small but warm, the wood stove crackling against the storm still raging outside. She handed Ethan a mug of strong tea, her hands shaking slightly. That fire was arson, she said bluntly. No question. Ethan stared into his tea. Doesn't matter. No one will go against Hank. We don't need them to. She pulled out her laptop. The claim is filed. The mineral rights are yours. And Ethan, she waited until he looked up. I had the samples tested while you were at the clerk's office. That deposit? It's worth $92 million at current market prices. The number should have stunned him. Instead, all he felt was a cold, quiet rage. Hank had tried to take everything from him. Again, well, two could play that game. Morning brought a strange sight to Brackenville. News vans. Dr. Reyes stood on the cabin porch, phone in hand, watching with satisfaction as reporters from 3 different stations set up outside what remained of Ethan's property. How? Ethan asked, stunned. She smiled grimly. I called in some favors. A mysterious fire the night after a massive mineral discovery? That's not just local news, that's national. Sure enough, by noon, the story was everywhere. Homeless janitor discovers fortune, then loses home in suspicious fire. The town buzzed with speculation. People who'd never given Ethan the time of day suddenly stopped him on the street, offering help, asking questions. Even Mrs. Miller from the general store pressed a bag of groceries into his arms, her eyes suspiciously bright. Always knew we're a good man. Ethan Cole, she muttered before hurrying away. The tide was turning. And Hank? For the first time in his life, Ethan saw real fear in Hank Van Camp's eyes as a man stormed into the sheriff's office, shouting about false accusations. Dr. Reyes squeezed Ethan's arm. This is just the beginning. Ethan nodded, watching Hank through the window. The trash king was done being pushed around, and Brackenville was about to learn some fires don't destroy. They forge. The legal battle. The Brackenville courthouse had never seen so much activity. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as Ethan climbed the stairs with Dr. Reyes at his side. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Whispers followed him down the hallway, bouncing off the polished wood paneling. Hank Van Camp stood near the courtroom doors, surrounded by his lawyers, his face a mask of barely contained fury. His gaze locked onto Ethan like a predator sizing up prey. You really think this little stunt will work? Hank hissed as they passed. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. Ethan didn't flinch. He met Hank's eyes and said nothing, just kept walking, the deeds of his land secure in his jacket pocket. Inside the courtroom, an elderly woman in a crisp pantsuit stood waiting. Martha Greeley, retired state prosecutor, according to Dr. Reyes. She greeted Ethan with a firm handshake. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades in courtrooms. Let's make history. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, called the court to order. Hank's legal team immediately launched their attack, claiming ancestral rights, questioning the validity of Ethan's claim, even suggesting the fire had been started by careless behavior. Martha didn't blink. She presented the deed first, clean, legal, indisputable. Then the mineral claim, properly filed and stamped. Finally, she called Dr. Reyes to the stand. The samples collected from Mr. Cole's property contained rhodium concentrations exceeding 18 grams per ton. Dr. Reyes testified, her voice clear and professional. At current market value, the deposit is worth approximately $92 million. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Hank's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The issue is land ownership, not. It's entirely relevant, Martha interrupted, because Mr. Van Camp only became interested in this land after the discovery was made. She turned to the judge. We have evidence that Mr. Van Camp visited the county clerk's office within hours of Mr. Cole filing his claim. That very night, Mr. Cole's home was burned to the ground. Hank shot to his feet. That's slander. The judge banged her gavel. Sit down, Mr. Van Camp. Martha didn't miss a beat. She called Sheriff Dawson to the stand next, and under oath, Evie couldn't deny the fire's suspicious timing. The cracks in Hank's armor were showing. The real turning point came when Martha called an unexpected witness, Derek Van Camp. The young man looked pale as he took the stand, his hands trembling slightly. He refused to meet his father's glare. Derek, Martha began gently, did you see your father the night of the fire? A long pause. Then, yeah. Derek's voice was barely above a whisper. He came home late. His boots, they smelled like gasoline. The courtroom erupted. Hank's chair screeched as he stood, his face purple with rage. You lying little... The judge's gavel came down like thunder. Order! Order! In the chaos, Ethan locked eyes with Derek. There was no apology there, just a raw, desperate defiance. The look of a son who'd finally had enough. When the judge finally ruled, her words were crisp and final. Mr. Cole's mineral claim is valid and binding. Mr. Van Camp's ancestral rights argument is dismissed for lack of evidence. As for the fire, she fixed Hank with a steely gaze. That matter is hereby referred to the state arson investigator. Hank's lawyers immediately began shouting about appeals, but the judge silenced them with a look. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. It was over. Outside, the sunlight felt different somehow, warmer, brighter. Reporters swarmed, but Martha and Dr. Reyes shielded Ethan as they pushed through crowd. Derek slipped out a side door, shoulders hunched, disappearing into the alley without a backward glance. Ethan almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You did it, Dr. Reyes said, squeezing his arm. Ethan shook his head. We did it. Martha adjusted her glasses, a small smile playing at her lips. Don't celebrate yet, Mr. Cole. Hank won't give up easily. But now... She patted the deed in his pocket. You hold all the cards. Ethan took a deep breath, looking out over Brackenville. The town that laughed at him, ignored him, tried to break him. Now they have to look him in the eye. Now they'd have to respect him. And that was worth more than any mineral claim. The trial that shook Brackenville. The Brackenville Gazette called it the trial of the century, though in a town with only one stoplight. That wasn't saying much. Still, the courtroom was packed on the morning Hank Van Camp's arson case began. Farmers in their Sunday best sat beside reporters tapping on laptops, all craning their necks whenever the side door opened. Ethan took his seat in the front row, flanked by Dr. Reyes and Martha Greeley. Behind him, whispers slithered to the crowd like snakes. Never thought I'd see the day. Hank's got 9 lives. He'll wiggle out. That janitor's got steel in his spine now. The bailiff called order just as Hank strode in, his custom suit looking oddly cheap under the fluorescent lights. For the first time in memory, the mighty Hank Van Camp appeared diminished. Then the witnesses began. Fire Chief Alvarez took the stand first, his voice gravelly from decades of smoke inhalation. Accelerant patterns don't lie, he said, clicking through photos of Ethan's burned shack. This fire started in 4 separate locations simultaneously. That's arson, plain and simple. Hank's lawyer, a slick out-of-towner with a $500 haircut. Try to argue it could have been lightning. Chief Alvarez snorted. On a clear night? Son, I've fought fires since you were in diapers. This was gasoline. The jury, 3 farmers, 2 teachers, and old Mrs. Pete from the diner, leaned forward. The real drama came when Sheriff Dawson was called. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he swore to tell the truth. Under Martha's razor-sharp questioning, his story unraveled like a cheap sweater. "You testified earlier that you saw no evidence of foul play," Martha said, adjusting her glasses. "Yet your own deputies report notes the smell of gasoline at the scene. Why wasn't that in your official statement?" The sheriff's eyes darted to Hank. "I must have overlooked. Or perhaps you overlooked it because Mr. Van Camp buys your squad cars." Martha's voice dripped honeyed venom. "The same way he overlooked paying taxes on his lake house for 7 years?" Hank's lawyer erupted in objections, but the damage was done. The sheriff left the stand looking like he wanted to crawl under it. Then came the bombshell. Martha called Derek Van Camp to testify. Not about the fire this time, but about the mineral rights. Derek sat stiffly, his knuckles white on the rail. "Dad always said land was power," he muttered. When he heard about Ethan's claim, he went nuts. Said no janitor was going to steal what belonged to us. Hank's face turned the color of raw steak. "You ungrateful little..." The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Martha pressed on. "And after the fire? What did your father say then?" Derek swallowed hard. "Now we'll see how long the trash lasts without a can." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Ethan felt Dr. Reyes grip his arm. This was it. The moment Hank Van Camp's empire began to crumble. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, even the flies stopped buzzing. Guilty of arson in the first degree. Hank roared like a wounded bull, knocking over his chair. "This is a goddamn witch hunt." The judge sentenced him to 15 years before the bailiffs could even cuff him. As they dragged Hank out, he locked eyes with Ethan across the courtroom. The hatred that was almost physical, but beneath it, something new. Fear. Ethan didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded once, like a man acknowledging the weather. The message was clear. The world has rules now, even for you. Outside, the autumn sun painted Main Street gold. Townspeople who crossed the street to avoid Ethan for years suddenly wanted to shake his hand. Martha lit a cigarette. Her first in a decade, she claimed. He'll appeal, of course. But with Derek's testimony, that's a life sentence. Dr. Reyes was already on her phone. "I've got 3 mining companies begging to partner with you. Ethical operations, union labor, your terms." Ethan watched the Van Camp construction truck rumble by. The driver staring at the courthouse in disbelief. The old order was toppling. And Ethan? He knelt to scratch Rusty's ears, the dog's tail thumping against his leg. "Let's go home," he said softly. For the first time in his life, the word home didn't taste like ashes. A new beginning. The first snow of winter dusted Brackenville like powdered sugar as Ethan stood on the ridge overlooking his land. Below, construction crews broke ground on the new mining operation. Not the brutal, earth-scarring kind Hank Van Camp would have built, but a modern, sustainable operation that Dr. Reyes had helped design. Solar panels gleamed beside the temporary offices, and the workers wore protective gear far beyond legal requirements. Rusty barked at a snowflake, spinning in happy circles before trotting back to Ethan's side. The dog's breath fogged in the cold air as he leaned against Ethan's leg, as if sensing the weight of the moment. "You sure about this?" Dr. Reyes asked, coming up beside him, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. "Once we start, there's no going back." Ethan studied the scene below, the careful excavation, the environmental safeguards, the union foreman laughing with his crew. This wasn't just a mine. It was a statement. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." The Brackenville Community Center had never seen a party like it. Every folding chair was packed with townspeople as Ethan stood at the front, shuffling his feet under the applause. Mrs. Miller had baked 3 apple pies. The high school band played slightly off-key. Even Sheriff Dawson showed up, though he lingered near the exit like he expected to be thrown out. Martha greedily banged the gavel on the podium for quiet. "As chairwoman of the newly formed Brackenville Mineral Trust, I'm proud to announce our first initiative, the Ethan Cole Scholarship Fund." A projector flickered to life. showing blueprints for the new vocational school. Ethan's throat tightened. It was one thing to sign the papers, another to see his name on something that would outlive him. Full tuition for any local student pursuing trades or environmental sciences. Martha continued. Paid for by a permanent 15% stake from the mine's profits. The applause shook the rafters. Old man Grady, who'd once called Ethan worthless to his face, wiped his eyes with a gnarled hand. Afterward, as people lined up for punch, a hush fell over the crowd. Derek Van Camp stood in the doorway, snow melting in his hair. Ethan met him halfway. Derek's hands were jammed in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. Heard about the scholarship, he muttered. Figured I don't know. See it for myself. Ethan studied Hank's son, the arrogant bully who tormented him, the broken boy who testified against his father. The kid was barely 20, already carrying the weight of a name that meant something different now. Engineering program starts next fall, Ethan said, handing him a brochure. Could use someone who knows construction. Derek's fingers trembled as he took it. He didn't thank Ethan, not with words, but the way his breath hitched spoke volumes. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of his new cabin, modest but sturdy, built with timber from sustainable forests, and watched the lights of the mine twinkle in the distance. The deed to his land hung in a fireproof frame above the fireplace. Rusty snored at his feet, belly full of steak scraps from the celebration. Dr. Reyes's truck rumbled up the drive. She climbed out holding 2 beers in a thick envelope. Final numbers from the first quarter, she said, tossing it onto the porch table. You're officially a millionaire. Several times over. Ethan popped the beer cap off on the railing. Hank ever tell you why he hated me so much? Dr. Reyes sat beside him, her breath fogging in the cold. I asked Martha. Turns out your grandfather outbid Hank's father for this land back in '58. The Van Camps never forgot. A decades-old grudge. All this pain over a patch of dirt that, as it turned out, held fortunes. Ethan took a long pull of beer. You think he knew about the rhodium? Doesn't matter now. Dr. Reyes clinked her bottle against his. What matters is what you do with it. In the distance, the mine lights shimmered like fallen stars. Tomorrow, they'd break more ground. Next week, the first scholarship checks would go out. And in a year, maybe Derek would be designing safer mines instead of burning down shacks. Ethan smiled into the night. For the first time in his life, tomorrow mattered more than yesterday. The ultimate choice. The offer arrived on thick, cream-colored paper with a gold-embossed logo at the top, Blackridge Mining Consortium. Ethan turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of what it represented before even opening it. Rusty nudged his knee with a wet nose, sensing his hesitation. You're right, Ethan murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. No putting it off. The letter inside was concise, professional, and staggering in its implications. $250 million. $250 million for full rights to the rhodium deposit. No strings, no residual shares. Just a clean buyout that would make him one of the richest men in the state overnight. Ethan set the paper down on his kitchen table, the numbers swimming before his eyes. He could go anywhere, do anything, never worry about money again. But at what cost? The Brackenville diner was unusually quiet for a Thursday morning. Martha Greeley sat across from Ethan in their usual booth, her sharp eyes scanning the Blackridge offer without reaction. When she finished, she folded the paper neatly and slid it back to him. They're desperate, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Rhodium prices jumped 30% last month. Your deposit is the largest untapped source in North America. Ethan tore a piece of toast in half, letting the crumbs scatter across his plate. It's a lot of money. It's a bribe. Martha's voice was quiet but firm. They know you could make twice that over the next decade if you keep control. They want you gone before other miners realize what's possible with sustainable practices. Outside the diner window, Ethan watched a group of high schoolers pile into a rusty pickup. Kids who might never leave Brackenville if nothing changed. Kids like he'd been. What would you do? He asked. Martha smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. I'm not the one who built a school instead of a mansion, Ethan. The mine site buzzed with activity as Ethan toured the latest expansion with Dr. Reyes, where Blackridge's proposal promised open-pit mining and chemical processing. Ethan's operation used closed-loop systems and electric equipment. The difference was visible in the clean air, the lack of acrid smells, the deer that still graze at the tree line. Got the latest assays back, Dr. Reyes said, handing him a tablet. We're yielding 22% more than initial projections. At this rate, the scholarship fund could triple by next year. Ethan scrolled to the data, but his attention kept drifting to the workers. Local hires, many of them former loggers and farmers retrained with union wages. Hank Van Camp had never given these men health care or profit sharing. In the parking lot, a familiar figure leaned against a surveyor's truck. Derek Van Camp, now sporting a hard hat with coal mining company stenciled on the side, was arguing good-naturedly with the engineering team over blueprints. Ethan felt something settle inside him. That evening, he lit a fire in his cabin stone fireplace and spread the Blackridge offer on the coffee table. Rusty flopped down at his feet with a contented sigh as Ethan picked up his phone. Dr. Reyes answered on the first ring. "Tell me you're not taking it." Ethan smiled. Counteroffer. He laid out his terms. Blackridge could purchase a 49% stake at market value, but operational control stayed with coal mining. All environmental protocols remained non-negotiable, and 10% of proceeds would fund clean energy research through the state university. The silence on the line stretched, so long Ethan thought the call had dropped. "You realize this makes you the most powerful miner in the region, right?" Dr. Reyes finally said. "They'll hate you for setting this precedent." Ethan watched the firelight dance across the deed hanging on his wall. Good. When the news broke, industry blogs called it the Coal Clause, a new standard for ethical mineral extraction. The New York Times ran a profile titled, "The Janitor Who Changed Mining Forever." Hank Van Camp, from his prison cell, reportedly threw his newspaper across the room. But in Brackenville, something unexpected happened. The town began to heal. The high school's vocational program had a waiting list. The diner extended its hours to accommodate mine workers on late shifts. And every Sunday, Ethan found a fresh pie on his porch. Never with a note, but he recognized Mrs. Miller's handiwork. Standing at the mine's overlook on the first day of spring, Ethan watched as the crew broke ground on the new solar farm that would power the entire operation. Derek stood beside him, quietly pointing out design improvements he'd suggested. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole wasn't just surviving. He was building a legacy, and it was worth far more than $250 million. Legacy of the Janitor. 10 years to the day after the fire, Ethan Cole stood on the steps of Brackenville's new community center, a bronze plaque gleaming in the afternoon sun. The inscription read, "For those who build instead of burn, Ethan Cole." The crowd gathered for the dedication ceremony was larger than the town's entire population back when he'd been just a janitor. Reporters, state officials, and even a documentary crew jostled for space alongside miners in clean work boots and students holding scholarship acceptance letters. Rusty, now gray-muzzled but still spry, lounged at Ethan's feet, enjoying the attention as people stooped to pet him. Mayor Greeley, formerly Martha, tapped the microphone with a smile. "When I first met Ethan, he owned nothing but a dog and a dream. Today, coal mining employs 20% of our county, funds over 200 scholarships annually, and proves daily that ethical business isn't just possible, it's profitable." The applause echoed off the solar paneled roof. Later, at the reception inside, Ethan found Derek Van Camp studying the wall of framed newspaper clippings. Brackenville's renewable energy hub, from janitor to industry trailblazer, and prominently displayed Van Camp Construction rebrands as Green Horizon Builders. Derek turned as Ethan approached. "Dad died last week," he said quietly. "Prison infirmary said it was a stroke. He refused to see me the last 5 years." Ethan remembered Hank's face in the courtroom, purple with rage. Some wounds never healed. Derek straightened his tie, the same forest green as his company's logo. "We just landed the state contract for wind farm installations. Full union crew, your recommended benefit package." Their hands met in a firm shake. No forgiveness. Exactly. Just two men choosing a better future. As twilight painted the mountains pink, Ethan drove his old pickup, still refusing to upgrade, up to the mine overlook. The operation below glittered like a model city. Solar arrays, reforested slopes, the sleek visitor center, where school groups learned about sustainable mining. Dr. Reyes joined him, her hair now more silver than black, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Thought you might need this after all the speeches. The coffee tasted exactly like the brew she'd made him a decade ago in her trailer. Some things didn't need to change. You ever miss it? She asked suddenly. The quiet? Before all this? Ethan watched a hawk circle over the reclaimed land where his shack once stood. Not for a second. They clinked mugs as the first stars appeared. This story proves that fortune favors the resilient. If Ethan Cole's journey inspired you, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life underdog victories. Who will rise from obscurity next? Stay tuned. Our next story might just change how you see the world. The camera would fade out there, but Ethan's story never really ended. It lived in every student who became the first in their family to graduate, in every miner who got health care instead of hardship, in every pie left anonymously on porches. And if you listen closely on quiet nights in Brackenville, you could still hear it. The sound of a town rebuilding itself, one healed heart at a time.